Me, like at that time in the East Bay, one of the seminal places for me that I really kind of grew up was at the place called the uctheatre that was on University Avenue just below Shattuck. It was a gigantic old movie theater that had been a repertory house. They showed movies, 35 millimeter, actual prints of films, and they changed the bill every night. I mean, that was what was so crazy. I mean, a different movie, 2 movies every night, which, thinking back on it, 3 or 4 sometimes, but if there was like a series, but it was a cavernous place. It was, it held, I mean, my memory, like 800 or...
Yeah, it was big. Yeah, it was a big movie palace in the 20s.
Yes, and it had fallen into sort of, kind of, funkiness by the time that we wound up there. But I remember like going there a lot. Like sometimes I would go there like 4 times in a week.
Me too. It was one of those weird things in the East Bay. Like almost everybody who was cool would have the UC calendar up on the refrigerator.
Oh yes, that was very yes. Circled. Yes, things were exactly. You have it on your refrigerator in your kitchen or something, and they would always be like circle. You got it at the beginning of the month. And you'd circle all the things that you planned to see, and you may only actually hit like 10 out of 25. But I just remember.
But that was also in the days before video. That was the only way you could see something like that.
Like
even simple, even like common things that don't seem like special to people today, like the Beatles movies or something like that, or like Clockwork Orange or something. Like it was an event.
It was an event.
Showing.
I mean, it wasn't like it was you could get it, like go down and rent it and have it, that night. I mean, if you planned, I'm not going to miss that. If I miss it, I'm screwed for like a year. Yeah. So you would go to you'd wind up at and see so many people. You're like, oh yeah, wow, of course that guy's here.
People show up in costumes.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It was so great.
Well, one of the greatest that I remember, the one to me, I would say the prime movie of that ilk to me was the Tammy Show, which is this Teenage Music International, which was this movie that was made in L.A. It was kind of the US Festival of the '60s. There was Motown groups in it, and I mean, I'm sure everybody kind of knows about it, but it had Leslie Gore and Jan and Dean hosted it, and it had the Beach Boys, and the Barbarians were this, punk 60s punk band that they sang this song called "Are You a Boy or Are You a Girl?" But I think they did in that particular movie, they did this song called "Hey Little Bird" or "Hey Little Girl," depending on what version they were doing. But I remember seeing the Tammy Show at the UC, and Christof and his whole band came in their regalia.
Wait, the Headless Horseman?
Yes, yeah. Yes, it was Russell. The same guys.
Horseless Headman,
yes,
I'm sorry.
The same guys. The horseless Headman. It was Bart and Russell and Christof. They just came down the aisle. Only for the Barbarians part. Who was the part that they wanted to see. And they I don't know how they somehow waited in the wings or something, but all of a sudden, right before the Barbarians came on, this group of total, guys that looked like they walked off the screen marched down the side of the aisle. And
what year was this
This
around?
was in 86, about 86.
Okay.
And, they were all dressed in, Winkle-Pick, Beetle boots, and, they all had long hair. And they marched down the aisle in a group, I remember, and sat in the front row. And then the Barbarians came on, and they all jumped up in a group and were screamed at the screen and got down on their hands and knees and were genuflecting to the screen and totally rocking out. And the band is a great band. I mean, the drummer is this guy Multi who had lost his hand in some car accident or something, but he played with an artificial. Like a hook, like a grappling, like a metal arm that he held his drums. He played the drums, and there was he has their very famous song, autobiographical song about him called Multi. But anyway, so they just were praying to the screen and just rocking out for this down, hey little bird, come on over here, and then it ended, and they all just left, and I'm like, wow, God, those guys were crazy cool, they just knew it, they just were there to and that was the kind of stuff that was so cool that went on, just it was, you know, there were just great characters, you know, like that. Do you remember? I mean,
Let me get your version.
Yeah.
Is that how you remember it?
Yeah.
The
We went there
UC
with
theater.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that night. It's just as he explained it. But that was. But the UC theater was just an incredibly great thing. That like that's a piece of Bay Area culture, just probably world culture that is really sadly gone now. That was something that was so neat when before video, and you could, you know, there were thankfully these places that were showing like the UC, like he said, showed a different movie every night or a different set of movies every night, and there was always these cult movies, usually like cult movies or foreign movies, art movies, and things like that. Almost never did they show really normal movies. You know, it was only really unusual, interesting things. And in those days, like now today, it seems really corny to say this, but like a movie like I mentioned Clockwork Orange before, just it sounds corny now because it's so overplayed and like it's on video and there are all these like every hipster in the world has seen it a million times. But then even though it was already 10 years after the movie had been made, it still had a certain kind of cultural magic about it. It packed a punch in some way. It really like had a certain kind of like people that would go to see that were like degenerates and weirdos and like freaks and really radical thinkers. And you know, so you'd go see the Clockwork Orange in the theater, and you would be surrounded by like the most incredible collection of characters and weirdos.
And when you hear people talking about the '60s, I mean, in a lot of these documentaries, people, Graham Nash or whoever, all these people will say something like, if you saw somebody across the street who had long hair in '64, late '64, or early '65, you had a kinship with them immediately, that you knew immediately that they were a kindred spirit in some way, shape, or form. And it was kind of the last bit of that. I mean, you like, oh, I saw that dude at Clockwork Orange, or it was somebody like, I've seen that guy or that girl at all. It was a way to like immediately, like, you could hone in on girls too. There's like, wow, that chick has been at all these particular movies, so she, you know, I've got to talk, you know, I'll run into her at the cafe in bed or something, you know, one of these great coffee houses in Berkeley where you're like, at least, you know, like, I can go talk to her because, you know, I've seen her like 4 times at always at cool movies. So you kind of had some sort of, you know, a connection, but it was a lot of the times it would be like the same groovy people. But I know this is more